Welcome to the third and final section of this module. This is all about reviewing your outcome or your final piece, and also about reviewing the sketchbook pages that correspond with the process of you finishing your final piece. Now, in the previous section, I mentioned that I had nearly finished my final outcome, but there were still a few things which I wanted to tinker with that I wasn't 100% happy with. Now, that's completely normal when you finish a piece of work like this. You may wish to step away from it and have a break, and then when you come back, you may feel like you still want to make some adjustments. That's absolutely fine, so long as they are small adjustments and that you record and document the process in your sketchbook to show the process of making those adjustments. So here is the demo piece that I've been working on. You'll see it's changed ever so slightly from when I showed it in the previous section. So there were a few things that I wanted to add, which were the gold string, and then there's also some plastic fishing line that I had found. So I kind of sewed those through the canvas with a strong needle. I made sure that I photographed each stage of the process and that I kept any bits and pieces and leftover materials and recorded what I did in my sketchbook. So in the sketchbook, the corresponding pages are the process double page, and you'll see there that I've printed out the images nice and clear in color. I've also got pictures and little illustrations of the materials that I used. I've talked about the stages of the process in chronological order. I've made sure that I've labeled the tools and equipment that I used. I've created a kind of reflection here, so I've written about how it happened and what went right and what went wrong. And then I've included the actual bit that I was testing on while I was working on the final piece. And then I have another double page here. Now, this double page I had originally done a placeholder called outcome because I wanted to document just the outcome, the finished thing. But actually, I realized I had so much more to say about the process that I decided to change this to say from process to outcome, so that it really shows documenting how the process that I continued to do as I worked on it led to the finished outcome. I will finish that title in the same way as that, with cut out letters, which you'll see then in the documentation of the final thing, but it's 95% finished. So I printed out lots of color images of the piece. And I also made sure that I got lots of detailed close-up shots and just zoomed in on certain pieces of the composition, and I got pictures of the actual work in progress. For example, here you can see I made some rubbings with the charcoal pencil, so I just made sure that I took a quick snap of that while I was working. Printing out color photos can be a bit tricky. If you don't have a color printer at home, which I don't, you can go to your local library and pay them a small fee in cash, usually, for printing out color pictures, or find someone that you know that has a color printer. It is quite important to do this and get quality images, because this is your evidence to show what you've actually done with your final piece. And then in these boxes, I've created some attractive borders with a different color paper, and I cut out the white boxes and handwritten my reflections about each of those things that you can see pictured there. Now, that actually is a time-consuming process, which you probably already know by now, but it's so worth doing because it looks really attractive. It shows presentation skills and attention to detail. As for what's actually written on those sections, I've just said here that I took a lot of photos while I was working, and I've described the process of making those adjustments. So the description includes things like, I wasn't sure, and then I decided to do this. This is the outcome that I wanted. So I'm going into real fine detail about what I did and why and how. On this page, you can see here that I've talked about the fishing line that I added. This was a later addition, so that's really important to document that. It says here, during the making of the piece, I went for a walk on the beach. I found this tangle of fishing line and decided to use it in my work. I untangled it and threaded it through the holes in the canvas as I did with string. So not only does it show the process and the outcome, it also links to the other thing that I did with sewing things through the canvas. so it makes it relevant to what I've already done. Here I talked about the use of the gold thread, and I've said originally I had thought about using thread to go across empty spaces. Remember those holes I made in the canvas? Because I was inspired by Barbara Hepworth's sculptures. However, when I made holes in my canvas, I realized that I preferred to have another layer underneath. So I added plain corrugated card, which turned out to be really easy to sew through with an ordinary needle. So you can see there that I've documented that process. You can even see my hand with the string and the needle right there in that picture. And then finally, I've talked about the use of line and what it does visually. So I've said I tried to space the lines created by the thread evenly. I wanted them to appear like rays of light and be a bright focal point. I also wanted them to connect and cross over layers. So as well as describing what I've done, I've talked about my intention and what I actually wanted to achieve with that effect. I've also gone into a little bit of interpretation territory here. So I've talked about rays of light. I've used that simile like rays of light, and I've been really specific and descriptive. So I've said this creates a bright focal point. So I've talked about my intentions and the effect of what I did in the final piece. So there you go. There's a double page of process documentation. So this is a bit more like raw and, you know, the making of the final piece kind of from the beginning. But this double page here is really about fine tuning and documenting those details and talking in detail about the effect that they have and why I did them. So that's the from process to outcome double page. Here is the double page about the evaluation, which we'll talk about in more detail in the next video. But it's just to give you an overview of what's coming next. And then to finish off my sketchbook, I've got a final page here, which is going to be next steps. So this is going to talk about very briefly what I could do next based on what I've already done. So there you go. This is reviewing the outcome alongside the sketchbook pages that go with it. Move on to the next lessons in the course, and then in the next video we'll talk about how to do that evaluation.